I'm coming at you with 2 reviews today, so buckle up. Hello everyone, welcome or welcome back to A Fictional Escapist. My name is Kris. Today's video is a dual review. We're going to be looking at the Doctrines of Fire by C.L. Jarvis and also Stranger Back Home by E.L. Haynes. But before we jump into those reviews today, make sure you're checking the description box down below for links to my social media and Discord should you want to come along for the ride. Now we are going to jump straight into Doctrines of Fire, which you can see behind me. I'll bring it up nice and close to the camera since I do have a physical copy by C.L. Jarvis. This one was a witty historical fantasy that was a little bit Sherlock Holmes and a little bit dark academia with some black magic along the way. To start us off with the plot, the reader follows a mature age student named George Stevens who has come to medical school from a military background. Without the financial and, quite frankly, social background that he needs to survive among the elites, he gets caught up in an academic rivalry for the ages. Dependent on the good word and charity of his professors, George falls into the hands of Dr. William Cullen and Dr. Joseph Black, who are investigating a series of deaths among the student population. Things turn serious when it becomes apparent that the professors' rival Dr. Brown has taken a rather unorthodox approach to his teaching methods, introducing students to the dangerous use of phlogiston or phlogiston, depending on where you're pronouncing it from. George has entered a world of dark chemistry, internal politics, and, quite frankly, mayhem. Being pulled in all directions, does he have what it takes to survive this world? That is the plot in a nutshell. Going too much more into it, we'll start going into spoiler territory, so we're going to leave it pretty vague, but you've got a sense that it's got a mystery element, you've got a sort of, I guess, detective element to it. We're trying to find out what the reason for the deaths of these students, and we also have that rivalry, which is promised on the first page, the opening blurb of this book, an academic rivalry turned deadly. Has taken dark academia and made it wickedly and addictively entertaining. This is based on a real academic rivalry which took place in the 1800s, and because of that, this story flows off the page and grips the reader within those mystery and magical elements. What really stood out to me in this book was the care which has gone into the accuracy of the language used for the time period, the real-life science based behind the doctrine, and also the awkwardness that can come from petty academic squabbles. The author has clearly done an extensive amount of research, not only of the medical facilities and the terms used in the time period where this book is set, but also the way that language was used. By doing this, she's created an incredible immersive experience which feels like you've stepped back in time and you're actually there on the pages with these characters. I must admit I found myself talking like the professors every time I put the book down, and I had to remember that I did live in the 21st century. Something else I enjoyed in this work is that the author has taken a lot of care to unpack the magic behind the doctrines in a way that was historically relevant for the time. She created a magic system around phlogiston, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong. I had to look it up, to be completely honest with you, before I started this video. But it was explored in such a fun way to see the experimentation that actually did occur with this chemical entity in the 1800s. In this magic system, certain people with an affiliation for the magic could pull, store, and use phlogiston to create elements such as fire or combustion. It was also used in weaponry as a combustible component, which at the time was an element being studied and written about in academic papers. Personally, I thought this was such a nifty aspect to the book, and I definitely nerded out over real science being put into a fantasy story. The last thing I'll mention for this book in particular is just how well Jarvis was able to portray petty squabbles that turn dangerous for students around the characters in question. If you've been exposed to academia in any way, shape, or form, this was another aspect of the book which really grounded you into the real-world experiences of professors who are seeking their own endgame regardless of the consequences. This happens in the real world. I've seen it happen to professors in my own studies where the rivalries turn quite explosive, except not as literally as in this book. Friendships are not only lost, but they're completely blown apart in this book, literally, by sometimes the smallest difference of opinion, and in this case, the stakes were too high to be ignored. Doctrines of Fire was such a unique flavor of fantasy that I could see myself becoming utterly addicted to. I can't wait to see where the author goes next, and we don't have to wait too long because Book 2, The Treaties of Air, comes out on September 21st. If you are someone who likes a little bit of a different variety in your fantasy, or you're looking for something outside of high classic fantasy, this is going to be really fun for you to reach to, particularly if you like those mystery elements in the stories that you read. If you are someone who is a fan of PJ Nwasu's The Dream of Death City, with that sort of darker mystery vibe, then this is going to be one that you want to check out. And that was The Doctrines of Fire by C.L. Jarvis. Now we'll move on to Stranger Back Home by E.L. Haynes. So we've jumped from one unique fantasy book into another, and the reason that Stranger Back Home was a unique blend of fantasy elements was that it was a wild and often bizarre blend of humorous quips, magic, and whimsy. This is very much one of those books where humor is at the forefront, but not in like a Terry Pratchett way, because I personally could never get on board with Terry Pratchett, whereas I quite enjoyed this. The plot of this one revolves around Sparrow. Sparrow has been called home to discuss a matter in his late father's will after receiving a mysterious text message from his half-brother. From that, he decides to cross worlds and see what all the fuss is about. When he arrives home, it becomes apparent that his brother did not, in fact, call him home, but also received a message of the same variety, asking him to meet to discuss their father's will. The brother blames Sparrow for the interruption of his life. But now that Sparrow is home, he is determined to uncover who this mysterious texter is, patch up some old friendships, and try not to get murdered along the way. This master of disguise and quiet entrepreneur will have to battle teenage vampires who will probably not kill him, but it's safer to sleep during the day, an old flame who will definitely try to kill him, and a number of times at that, and an almost daily haircut which does not make one lick of difference, but is great for meeting important social clientele. Like I said, this book was slightly bizarre. There are a few things worth mentioning as a selling point to this type of story, the first being the way that the book is structured. Every chapter had something new that sort of fit together and made you want to continue turning the pages to see if it ended up making sense or not. Next up, our main character Sparrow was a little gnome of lovable chaos. He was just a bundle of chaos from start to finish. And finally, we also had some really quiet messages in this book of friendship, family, and acceptance, which were sporadically thrown throughout the pages, but really made for a nice thematic experience. E.L. Haynes is a traveller of fictional worlds, and Stranger Back Home invites the reader to do just the same. This book does not take itself seriously at all. It wants the reader to have fun and to get lost in this immersive, topsy-turvy world, and I, for one, got completely sucked in when I was reading this book. Each chapter of Stranger Back Home has the reader doing a 180 and trying to pivot to Sparrow's latest and greatest scheme, whether it was opening a spa for creatures called the kobolds, who definitely hate gnomes, and he had to wear a disguise every time he opened up this spa. He might have been signing up the latest and greatest girl band to an entertainment association, or swindling underground workers into moving the dead to another location, all in the space of a day. You never really knew what you were going to get with Sparrow or in this city, and that's what makes it so fun. Talking about Sparrow, this self-assured and definitely not racist little gnome caused chaos wherever he went, but somehow things seemed to work out. His name was well known, his reach in the city was wider than anyone but him would believe, and it was all in a day's work. It was hard not to be enamored with our main protagonist of this book, as the world around him seemingly burst into activity wherever he went. His quiet scheming and more devious plots all came from a good place, and it made him a joy to follow. Finally, for how bizarre and unique this book felt, it is worth mentioning some of the more wholesome messages that came through the pages. Even though it was a wild ride of a book, you never knew what you were going to get next. It was very fast paced, but it did have some really lovely thematics to drive it home. Throughout the pages, there were definitely moments of family and friendship and acceptance, which warmed the soul. Sparrow sought out the good in each and every one of his many side characters, even though he said time and time again he had no friends, only acquaintances and people he worked with or worked for. But it was obvious that Sparrow cared very deeply about these people in his life, and he wanted to protect himself from potential pain of letting someone in, something which I think a lot of us have experienced in our own lives. And through many a bacon sandwich and crazy adventure, Sparrow discovered that maybe having friends isn't so bad after all. I had a lot of fun with this book. This one is just a quick review. It is a quite short book. It was wacky, it was wild, it was fun. The plot may have lost me a couple of times as I was reading it because it just descended into nonsense. But if you're a lover of bizarre fantasy or even bizarre sci fi, think along the lines of Tim Pratt, Doors of Sleep, then you're probably going to have a good time with this and get a few unexpected laughs along the way. Those were two very quick fire reviews for the Doctrines of Fire and Stranger Back Home. Have you read either one of these or will you? Please let me know in the comments down below. If you like the content, give it one of those. If you want to see more of it, then click subscribe at your will, and I'll catch you in the next video.